Welcome back, everybody, to episode 3 of the That's DPI podcast. I'm Zach, and that's Tyler over there. And a lot has happened since the last episode. In the middle of our recording last week, Geno Smith was traded to the Raiders. It was very disappointing because we started recording. We thought we had all of our ducks in a row, and then we both look at our phones and we call each other back immediately, and we go, well, we missed a big one, especially since we touched on quarterbacks. Um, Unfortunate miss by us, but a ton of signings have happened from the recording of the last episode to now, and we're going to walk you through what we think is our top 10 biggest signings of the free agency period so far. And we're going to start off with Josh Sweat going to the Cardinals, hailing from Philadelphia, the star edge rusher. I think he's a phenomenal ad for them. Tyler, do you want to go ahead and take the next couple?
Yeah, I think Josh Sweat's a valuable addition. We also see, Zach, your team got into the mix. DJ Reed, the former New York Jet, signed on a 3-year, $48 million deal. Washington, I touched on Washington and what they need to do this offseason in episode 1. And they continue to add things with a trade for Laramie Tunsil. The Buffalo Bills stack up on defense with Joey Bosa. The Steelers made a couple moves, one on offense, one on defense, with DK Metcalf on a 4-year, $132 million deal. They also added cornerback Darius Slay on a 1-year deal from Philly. Washington did lose someone in Jonathan Allen. He's going to the Viking on a 3-year, $51 million deal. Chris Godwin, this is going to affect fantasy football players, but Chris Godwin is going to come back to the Buccaneers. He's going to be reunited with Baker Mayfield for another season. He got a 3-year, $66 million deal, a very team-friendly deal in my opinion. And then two massive wide receiver gains this week. Devontae Adams signed a 2-year deal with the LA Rams, which will make up for the fact that they lost Cooper Kupp. The most recent signing, Cooper Kupp, just signed a deal with the Los Angeles Rams. That is also those last three names, Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, and Cooper Kupp, are going to be very big fantasy football implications. Now, Zach, my question for you is out of those 10 signings, which is the biggest deal in your opinion?
I think that without question, it is Laramie Tunsil being traded to the Washington
Trade.
Commanders. It is a trade. It is the only trade. Well, technically, we covered the DK Metcalf trade. He was also an extension, but the only trade that appeared on that graphic was the Laramie Tunsil move, and I think that move does wonders for the Washington Commanders offense and simultaneously completely dismantles the Houston Texans. They now have to hit on a couple lineman positions in the draft to make this move worth it. And that's really tough to do sometimes in the NFL. So, but when you look at a guy like Laramie Tunsil and the impact that he has on an offense, last season, he was 19th out of 81 tackles and per Pro Football Focus and had an 89.1 pass blocking grade. That's phenomenal for a guy like Daniels who took well over 45 sacks last year. He's a rookie. You know what happened in Washington the last time they got a young, promising quarterback? Injuries derailed his entire career in RG3. The Washington Commanders are making a move to prevent that from happening again by acquiring one of the best pass protecting tackles in the NFL.
What's your criteria in ranking this as number one? Because I do agree, I don't disagree with anything you said, but we might be having different criteria here.
I think that it's huge that a player that you bring in is an organizational and cultural fit. I mean, look at my team. The Detroit Lions
Okay, so you're
don't
looking for
bring in
fit.
anybody unless they fit with the gritty, hard work culture that Detroit has. And so Laramie Tunsil fits that organization perfectly. He has done nothing but work for Houston and Miami, and he's gonna go protect a young quarterback, be the anchor on that left side, and an offensive line that struggled to protect their quarterback last year. And so organizational fit, also value is something that I looked at a lot. And I don't think that Washington gave up all that much, although I do think it could have major impacts down the line on Washington, what they did give up. But in terms of picks, they didn't give up any first rounders. So that's always huge and important. So those are the two things that I looked at when I make Laramie Tunsil my best move of the offseason so far. How about you,
Okay.
Tyler? What are your
My
criteria?
my only my only concern with putting Tunsil at number one is I do agree. I think it's a huge piece for Washington. You brought up what happened to RG3 without an offensive line. You got to protect Jaden Daniels. I've said that they're adding weapons on offense, they're re-signing weapons on defense, and now they're going after the offensive line. Is one lineman enough to completely change what that offensive line was last year, though? Is Tunsil enough?
And that's actually something that I was going to get into. I don't think that Tunsil moves the needle in terms of their Super Bowl aspirations because of the holes they still have on defense in the secondary. They signed a lot of plug and play veterans to 1 year deals on the defensive side that I don't think are going to solve their issues. They were one of the worst coverage defenses in the NFL last year, and I think that they did not do enough to address that. And so when you look at the amount of picks that they gave up for Tunsil, they gave up a third, a seventh, a second, and a fourth. Not all this year. Two of those, the third and the seventh this year, and the second and the fourth next year. I think that's a lot of draft capital that you could have used to pick up some defensive depth. But I still think that the impact that having a pass protecting left tackle will have on a young quarterback is unprecedented. You need somebody like that to anchor the entire O line. He'll make the whole O line better. He'll make Daniels better. He'll give him just enough time to escape those tight pockets. He's a speedy, fast quarterback. So Tunsil certainly makes this offense very, very difficult to stop. I mean, look what they did in the divisional round against Detroit. They put up 50 points. I mean, nearly 50 points. So you have to look at Laramie Tunsil as a huge improvement, at least to one of the weaker positions on that line.
Uh,
But you have to be
when you
concerned about
first
value in picks on defense.
Okay, and I agree. Uh, the way you started your last statement tells us where our disagreements come from. You said that it does not move their Super Bowl needle very much. And that's my number one criteria is how does this move the needle? So my number one pick on the recent signings is Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa, as a reminder, he signed it's only a 1 year deal, but he signed a 1 year, $12.6 million deal to the Buffalo Bills coming from the LA Chargers. Now, the reason that I've got him as my number one is, like I said, the Super Bowl needle. When you look at the Buffalo Bills and what has caused their seasons to end year after year to the Chiefs is their defense. You look at the 13 seconds game. Josh Allen put a game-winning touchdown with 13 seconds left. Lost the game without even touching the ball. When you look at last year alone, their offense stalled at bad times, but their defense did not come in clutch when they need to. I've got a couple stats for you. So the Buffalo Bills last year were ranked 27th according to Pro Football Focus. And specifically, they were also ranked 26th in run defense. They had a really good pass rush and had a really good passing defense, but overall, they had a bad defense, and their run defense was 26th in the NFL. Here's where Joey Bosa comes in. I know that you were going to probably counter with Joey Bosa is not who he was in 2021. And you're right, he's not who he was in 2021. But when you look at how he has been, he's still been a great player. Overall, he's had a 63.9 Pro Football Focus grade, which is right at average. His pass rush has been right at average, but the Bills' pass rush has not been the issue. Their issue has been the run. Joey Bosa got a 73 Pro Football Focus run grade, 10 points higher than his overall grade, and he's way above average on the defensive line. And losing Von Miller, I don't see an argument where Joey Bosa is a worse player than Von Miller. So you're replacing Von Miller with Joey Bosa, whose strength is his run defense, and the run defense was the hole in the Bills defense. And so to me, this really moves the needle over as to this might be the missing piece to what it takes to stop Mahomes and the Chiefs. And that's why I put Joey Bosa's number one, is because it absolutely moves their Super Bowl window, in my opinion.
And I see your point there. Joey Bosa's run defense grade is his highest grade of all of the categories: tackling, pass rush. But you have to consider Joey Bosa's defensive grade overall was a 63.9 last season in the regular season. Is that truly a 3-down guy that you can depend on? That's average to below average. It was his lowest defensive grade of his career, and by a lot, by 10 points at least. Joey Bosa experienced extreme regression in LA last year, and I think that it's important to understand that the guy's been playing in the league since 2016. He may not be quite the piece that he was even 2 years ago. So run defense is important, but pass rush, as you know, as a Chiefs fan who watched the Super Bowl this year, pass rush is the most important aspect of a defense. If you can get to the quarterback,
But they're already
you can do
good at
anything.
pass rush.
I disagree that the Bills are anywhere near where they need to be in pass rush. They still need to make some moves in terms of pass rush. So Joey Bosa, who seemingly took a step back in his pass rushing, his grade in 2023 was an 80, and his grade before that in 2022 was an 88. So clearly he was an elite pass rusher at one point. Has dropped all the way down to a 64. So he's a liability on third downs. He cannot get to the quarterback the way that he was able to last year. He only had 34 pressures this season, which for a guy that played as many downs as he did, isn't exactly where they need him to be. For context, in his 2021 season and his 2020 season, he had 60 pressures, 60 plus pressures in both of those seasons. So for a guy that's getting half the pressures that he was at his prime, you can't really play him all 3 downs. He can be a 1 or 2 down outside guy, but you have to be careful putting him in against mobile quarterbacks like Mahomes, because those guys that have the lower pass rush grade, Mahomes eats them alive. He eats them alive if you do not have a solid pass rush. It's just plain and simple.
Fair. I also, the one thing I want to point out too is that yeah, he's not the superstar that he once was, but I also don't think the Bills are paying for the superstar that he once was as either. With it being only a 1 year, $12.5 million deal, it's kind of a prove it. I think you're gonna get him for a year. You're gonna see if he's gonna continue to slowly go down a little bit, or if he can get back to where he was. And if he doesn't do well, it's only 12 million. You're not giving him 15, 20 million. You're giving him 12 and a half for 1 year. There's probably some incentives behind it as well. I think it's a low risk, high reward situation for the Bills.
Gotcha. And I do think $12 million is pretty good value for a guy like Bosa, because we know that there's talent within him. He has been a dog for the last decade in the NFL. So if he can have some sort of career revival, kind of like Bobby Wagner did in Washington, I think that this move could really pan out, and you could get really good value potentially. I'm not sure what caused such a dramatic decline in his defensive grades last season on what was a generally successful Chargers defense. I mean, it was one of the best in the NFL. So to see simultaneously the Chargers defense get better and Bosa's grades get worse, it's concerning to say the least. But I do think of all the moves, this one could turn out to be one of the better ones. And I think in order for my move that I chose, Laramie Tunsil, to work out, the Commanders really have to nail the next 2 drafts, because they lost 2 picks in each of the next 2 drafts. If you don't nail the next 2 drafts, all of a sudden you have to pay a rookie quarterback more money than any rookie quarterback's ever been paid before, and you don't have any young homegrown talent on rookie deals. So I do think that in terms of value, it's much better than Tunsil. They gave up much less, only $12 million on a 1 year kind of prove it deal for a veteran. So I think it will be interesting to see how these two moves play out in the regular season. But we can move on to some more exciting moves in the quarterback space. One we briefly touched on in the intro, that would be our quarterback signings for this season. Pull up the graphic. Beginning with Sam Darnold leaving the Minnesota Vikings, my Lions division rival, and signing a 3 year, $100 million contract with Seattle. And then Justin Fields, 2 year, $40 million deal with the Jets. He was formerly with the Steelers, now with the Jets. Kenny Pickett made the trade from the Philadelphia Eagles to Cleveland Browns. DTR traded to Philly in that trade. It's the first quarterback swap since Jared Goff and Matt Stafford back in 2021. And of course, Geno Smith made the move to the Raiders from Seattle for a third round pick. So I want to get your thoughts on some of those moves. What do you think about Sam Darnold?
Sam Darnold, I've never been a fan of Sam Darnold in the sense that I think last year was a fluke year. He played well. The Vikings played well all around. But I think week 18 and the playoff game for the Vikings shows who Sam Darnold truly is. And I don't like Sam Darnold. The move that I love on this list, well, not personally, but as a sports fan, the move I love is, you know where I'm going with this, is Geno Smith. As a Chiefs fan, I hate this signing because this is going to make the Raiders better. I haven't been the biggest fan of Geno Smith in general. But of the quarterbacks available, I think Geno Smith has been really good. I think it's a good fit, especially because he's reuniting with Pete Carroll, who he had success with in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
General quarterback, I don't think Geno Smith's the best guy. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I love that move for the Raiders. Geno Smith's going to reunite with his former coach. The move that I'm questioning, though, is why is Kenny Pickett on this list? We talked about this off air. We talked about this off air and getting this list ready. You wanted to keep him on there. Why is he on this list?
So, number one, I do think it's important that we at DPI highlight the first quarterback swap since Goff and Stafford. That was a big one. Jared Goff, mind you, in that swap was kind of left out to die in Detroit. Detroit, um, the Rams ate his contract to give him to Detroit, and he was kind of cast aside by his team. Kenny Pickett is in a similar situation. The Steelers were not interested in keeping him as the franchise quarterback. And quite honestly, he didn't perform to standards in Pittsburgh. And so they let him go. And he performed admirably as a backup. And now he's a Super Bowl champion. But his statistics have been underwhelming. In the last 2 years, he's got 8 touchdowns and 5 picks. Okay. It's not the best look for me that I'm defending Kenny Pickett as a starting quarterback. However, I think that the coaching staff in Cleveland has been able to do some pretty nice things with quarterbacks over the last couple of years. Baker Mayfield was able to develop under that coaching staff before he made the move initially to Carolina, then LA, and then Tampa. And Jameis Winston played well under the scheme. He even notably threw well over 400 yards in a game for the Cleveland Browns last season. I think that Kenny Pickett was suffocated by Pittsburgh's just antiquated offense. They ran a horrid offense for a rookie quarterback, and Kenny Pickett's development suffered for it. So I'm hoping for a little bit of a career revival a la Justin Fields in Pittsburgh, ironically enough. I think Kenny Pickett has a chance to make some moves in Cleveland that we've never seen as far as his development goes. And DTR, he's a backup, but he's a solid mobile quarterback backup that gets to learn from one of the better mobile quarterbacks in the NFL, Jalen Hurts.
So, yeah, obviously the Eagles are not bringing in Pickett to be a starter. So, what does it take for Kenny Pickett I mean, we don't want to wish for a Jalen Hurts injury, obviously. So outside of that bad scenario, is there a way for Kenny Pickett to prove that he can still be an NFL starter?
Well, Kenny Pickett's all by himself in Cleveland. It's him and Watson. Um, DTR it went to Philadelphia behind Jalen Hurts, but Kenny Pickett is now Cleveland's. Cleveland has announced that Kenny Pickett's going to compete for the starting job with Deshaun Watson out there,
Okay.
and I think
I
that
had that backwards on our
yeah,
graphic, and that's what confused me. That is my apologies on that one. Okay.
you're all good. But I think that when you look at his competition in Cleveland, it's Deshaun Watson, who has been horrific. He's honestly been tough to watch in terms of NFL quarterbacks go, especially for the amount of money being paid. We've covered this before on the podcast, but I think Kenny Pickett, all he has to do is prove that he can beat Deshaun Watson in a QB competition. And they just re signed Nick Chubb, veteran running back. They've got a great O line in Cleveland. I think that the cards are going to align for a Kenny Pickett revival year. I'm predicting at least 20 passing touchdowns for a guy that's never eclipsed 10 in his career. I'm predicting at least 20 passing touchdowns and less than 10 picks. Not exactly a not exactly a Pro Bowl level season, but certainly a career revival for a guy that was riding the bench in Philadelphia this past season.
I'm glad I'm a Chiefs fan, not a Browns fan. For a number of reasons, but I don't have faith in Kenny Pickett. I do agree with you that it is not going to take too much to beat out Deshaun Watson in a quarterback battle, but I don't know if that would make me feel better as a Browns fan. I just don't think Kenny Pickett has ever been good. I think Mike Tomlin is a really good coach, and I think if Kenny Pickett was going to be any sense of a good quarterback, Tomlin would have been able to develop that. Tomlin has developed quarterbacks well in the past. Justin Fields played terrible in Chicago. Not saying he played great in Pittsburgh, but he certainly played better. Russell Wilson played terrible for the Broncos. Again, didn't play great in Pittsburgh, but he played better. We see this improvement in Pittsburgh quarterbacks, and we never saw that with Kenny Pickett as a starter. And I don't think we're going to see a good Cleveland Browns team whatsoever. I think there's going to be more interceptions than touchdowns, if it's not even even. And I think the Browns are going to end up with the top 10 pick in next year's draft.
Yeah, and I understand why you say that. This is a very hot take for me. Kenny Pickett hasn't done a whole lot in the NFL to instill confidence in someone who looks at the analytics. But I thought his rookie year, he looked relatively solid and was hampered by the fact that he hadn't started the whole season. There was this constant pressure from Mike Tomlin that he would not start in games where he was playing poorly. And it really stunted his development. And he left Pittsburgh after just 2 years, a first round pick, only getting 2 years of leeway, and he didn't even start a full season in either of those years. To me, it's just frustrating. When you look at a guy like that, it reminds me a little bit of Sam Darnold in the sense that the man never had a fair shake to begin with in New York, and he went somewhere else where the situation was better, the coaching was better, and he proved that he can, at least if not for one season, put up some numbers. So I think that Kenny Pickett will be an average starting quarterback in the NFL, which is a hot take for how poorly Pickett has played in the last 3 seasons.
I hope he plays well. I don't, like I said, I don't think he will. I hope he does play well. He's a very likable player. The Browns organization is a very likable organization outside of Deshaun Watson.
Right.
People want to see Browns fans happy, is what I'm getting at. So I hope he does play well. We'll see if that's the case or not, though.
But moving on to our final segment of this episode. It's going to be a little bit of a longer segment, but we believe that it's going to be fun for everybody. Who's your quarterback is the name of this segment, and I'm going to pass it on to Tyler to kind of explain what we're doing here. Why are all of these quarterbacks on the screen? What do they all have in common, and what on earth are we doing with them?
So the game that we're going into now is Zach, you and I are going to imagine that we are general managers, not necessarily for the Chiefs or the Lions, but just a general manager uh, looking for a quarterback. The names on this list: Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Justin Fields, and Sam Darnold. These are all guys that have been free agents at some point this season. We did not include Geno Smith on this list because he was a trade acquisition, but all of these guys, some of them have been signed, of course, with Sam Darnold, but some of them, they've all been free agents. And so we are going to pick as a GM who's your quarterback that you're bringing into your organization out of this list. Zach, I will let you start first on this. Who's your quarterback?
Sure, but before I choose my quarterback, adding a little bit of suspense, this is kind of the reason we started this podcast. Tyler and I, for the last 2.5 years, would engage in hours-long conversations debating silly questions like this to the chagrin of my girlfriend Andrea. So we thought that we're going to bring the segment that basically started it all, and we're going to mindlessly debate a silly question um, that includes a bunch of hypotheticals, like we're a general GM, but we're gonna have a lot of fun with it. Hope you guys like it. My
And
quarterback.
to give the viewers a little bit of context on what you
What
said
I'm
about us
ripping.
just saying our takes about silly questions, as soon as you and I just start talking anything sports, Andrea just walks up and leaves the room because she knows it's going to be an hour and a half before she
She
can
knows
say
the
anything
drill.
else to us.
Exactly. So
I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I just want to
no,
give a
you
little bit
you
more
had a great
context to
cliffhanger.
our audience.
So my quarterback is Justin Fields, and I'm gonna tell you why. Justin Fields has got a bad rap in the NFL. Like you said earlier, he did not play well in Chicago. I think he had a combined like 7 wins in Chicago. It was brutal. Um, and Chicago decided to move on from him after just 3 years. And he went on to Pittsburgh and played well for the first couple of games in this past season, and then was benched for Russell Wilson. And I think that this was unfair. I think that this was a very unfair move because when you look at statistics, Justin Fields has been a serviceable quarterback his last 2 years of the NFL. Actually, he's been more than serviceable. In total, over the last 2 seasons, try to hold your surprise, Tyler. He has had 30 total touchdowns. That's 9 rushing and 21 passing to just 10 interceptions, 30 touchdowns, 10 picks. And his PFF grade in terms of passing has improved every year. And his completion percentage just hit a career high last season and has gone up every season he's been in the NFL. In 2021, it was at 58.9. That's brutal. Then in 2022, it went up to 60, then 61, and then finally 65 last year. And that's with his highest drop percentage of his career at 7.8. He's never had a drop percentage that high, and he still put up a career best completion percentage. You look at a guy like Justin Fields, and I know that we're supposed to be general GMs, but you reunite him with a college teammate in Garrett Wilson, we're gonna see a career revival like nobody's ever seen, and this is gonna put Kenny Pickett to shame. I said Kenny Pickett was gonna be an average quarterback. I think Justin Fields will be an above average quarterback. He's going to take care of the ball, and he's going to really surprise some people in New York.
So according to That's DPI's detailed, precise, and informed takes, the two best starting quarterbacks available both came from Pittsburgh last year. I'm thinking Russell Wilson. And
Unbelievable.
the fact that we have Wilson and Fields on the same team and having played in similar games, we can compare them. So, Zach, I would like to compare them with you now.
Oh, okay.
Last season, Russell Wilson played in 11 games. Justin Fields played in 10. They obviously played in the same game a couple times. That's why that number adds up to a larger amount than the regular season occurred. In those games, I will give you the credit. Justin Fields had a higher completion percentage. But when you look at the yards per attempt and the yards per game for passing, Russell Wilson clears Justin Fields by over 100 yards in yards per game. Russell Wilson last year had 225 yards per game. Justin Fields had 110 yards per game. Now, Justin Fields obviously clears Russell Wilson in rushing, but not by as much, in my opinion. In terms of total rushing yards, Justin Fields only had about 150 more rushing yards in general, not per game, total. He had about 150 rushing yards, higher total. Justin Fields does have a better winning record, 4-2 versus 6-5. But when you look at a quarterback, I want to see. I think passing is my number one priority, and having 200 over 200 yards per game versus just over 100 yards per game is not it. If I'm debating between the two, I cannot pick Justin Fields. I do agree with you that in Chicago, that was not his fault. That was a very big coaching malpractice by Matt
No
Nagy.
kidding.
But
And
Russell
Eberflus.
Wilson's a better quarterback. He's a far better passer, and he's not a worse runner by much.
I understand that you think that Russell Wilson is a better passer and the rushing stats are comparable. And maybe last year that's true. But we have to understand that Justin Fields is just 2 years removed from an 1,100-yard rushing season where he scored 8 touchdowns and had
That's fair.
7.1 yards per carry. That's nuts for a quarterback. And I understand that in Chicago he was running for his life. There was no O-line cohesion, and the coaching did not scheme him very well. So, but even still, he earned a Pro Football Focus running grade of 91.5. He was in the upper echelon of rushing production, outclassing guys like Lamar and Allen. So he's got it in him. He's got that talent. And that element of his game is still there. He's still a young guy. So when you look at the amount of weapons that Justin Field has in his toolbox, it's it's far superior to Russell Wilson at this stage of his career. Russell Wilson is an accurate passer and a good leader at this point, but Justin Fields has so much upside, so much potential, and so much athleticism, and he's made so many incremental improvements every year he's been in the NFL. I think there's no brainer. At least we can agree on one thing in this segment is that we disrespect the hell out of Sam Darnold. We do not like Sam Darnold. We're over here debating two Steelers quarterbacks, and we have not once mentioned Sam Darnold at all.
We're debating the
36
backup
touchdowns.
Steelers quarterback before we're talking about the quarterback that went 14-3 last year.
So I know I have a lot of disdain for Sam Darnold. I mean, the two games I watched him play against Detroit, we beat him both times, and one of them was a game that you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Week 18 versus the Lions. He absolutely wet the bed on national television and arguably the biggest regular season game in NFL history. So I think that Sam Darnold had not shown a ton of flashes before this season, throws passes to Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, does really, really well. And I don't think that he's going to do as well in Seattle. I could be proven wrong. He may have taken the developmental leap to get there, but man, it's tough for me to respect a guy like Sam Darnold going into his like 9th season on one year of productivity. Where it's been up and down.
My thing with Sam Darnold is he gives me the same vibes as Chiefs fans, plug your ears, Matt Castle.
Oh,
He did horrible for most of his career, but he had a couple decent years. And it gives me that vibes. I don't trust it. I think Sam Darnold's success last year is a mirage on the horizon.
Oh, I don't know if we have enough time to talk about Matt Castle on this podcast.
We definitely
But
do not, because you and I have gotten into heated debates about that. That's for a next time.
Matt Castle, yeah, that is its own episode, truly. And I Actually, I agree with you on this one. Sam Darnold was the victim of horrible coaching in New York, just like Matt Castle was in Kansas City. But I think that they're around the same talent level, and that's about average. So I imagine that Sam Darnold's going to regress closer to the mean. I think that he's not worth $100 million by any stretch of the imagination, and the Jets are getting far more value in a guy like Justin Fields, um, as opposed to Sam Darnold. So, um, if there's one thing we can agree on, that you don't want Matt Castle Darnold on your team for the upcoming 2025 NFL season.
In a future episode, I think we should break down those guys more in detail. But for now, I think that's going to be it for this week. Appreciate you guys watching. Join us next week as we talk about contracts and how in the world those work.
Thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you next week.